The empire, long divided, must unite. Long united, must divide. Thus it has ever been. These are the opening lines of the most frequently, perhaps excessively adapted book in video game history, and one which most Americans have never heard of: Romance of the Three Kingdoms. It's an exaggerated, romanticized telling of the fall of one of China's ancient dynasties, the Han, and the subsequent struggles by various warlords to reunite the country under one banner. That history is from the 2nd and 3rd centuries, and the book was written in the 14th. So, despite the author dying long before Columbus arrived in the New World, we're much closer in time to him than he was to the events he was depicting. Of course, so removed from history, he took considerable liberties with the telling to suit his 14th century audience. And modern adaptations have taken considerable, sometimes brazen liberties too. Not that the source material really needs to be zhuzhed up. Case in point, this is Shahhodun. In the book, he is shot in the eye, pulls out the arrow, and eats his eye right off the arrow like a kebab, declaring, "This is the essence of my father and the blood of my mother. I cannot waste it," before charging and killing the guy who shot him. There are a ton of dramatic battlefield moments like this, and many memorable characters and battles over the course of about 100 years, meaning that ROTK is ripe for adaptation into a wide variety of game genres, from JRPG, Destiny of an Emperor, to Souls-like, Wolong Fallen Dynasty, to MMO, Heroes of the Three Kingdoms, to beat 'em up, Warriors of Fate, to RTS, Dragon Throne, Battle of Red Cliffs, to hack and slash, Dynasty Warriors, which was what lured me into reading the entire 2,000-page novel to begin with. And of course, there's also the genre that this video is about: grand strategy. Since the late 80s, Koei has been making strategy games based on Romance of the Three Kingdoms called, what else? Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Not all of those are grand strategy games, but many, including 11 and 14, are. And Sega's Creative Assembly team has been making grand strategy games under the Total War moniker, with Three Kingdoms being one of their more recent entries. Great, lots of promising options for a Three Kingdoms diehard like me. So, after all this preamble, why is the thumbnail for this video Crusader Kings? I could see it coming from a mile away that grand strategy was not going to be my cup of tea. And in the case of ROTK in particular, the parts of that story that resonate with me are things like Zhang Fei's 1 versus 10,000 stand at Changban, or Dianwei swinging the corpses of enemy soldiers like ragdolls, or Pangda bringing his own coffin to a duel. Not the things like deciding which civil servants get appointed to which civil service positions in which prefectures, or counting up how many grains of rice you had. Those mundane details, while important in aggregate, in the particular, do not spark joy. If I were to summarize my experience playing Romance of the Three Kingdoms, it would be clicking the same options in the same menus over and over. It reminded me of starting a match in an Advance Wars game, when you're trying to expand territory and prepare for military confrontation, but for my taste, it's way more tedious and manual in ROTK without being any more interesting. I want to make sure I have plenty of food and plenty of gold, and my armies need to be staffed and armed, sure. And I need to expand territory, sure. But although I understand that more is better in all of these categories, feeling out when a marginal increase in food versus gold is more valuable, I don't really have a good basis for that decision. So I'm just trying to increase everything and hoping things work out. Boredom defeated me long before Yuan Shao even took the field. Total War was slightly better from a UI perspective, less repetitive menuing, but I was taken aback by how antiseptic it was. And to be fair, Total War Three Kingdoms is primarily based not on Romance of the Three Kingdoms, but on the more realistic historical record. There's a romance mode I opted for, but while that allows for some mechanical adjustments, allowing combat operations to focus more on individual heroic generals rather than having them disappear into their armies, it just completely lacked the pageantry and storytelling of ROTK. And for both Total War and Koei's ROTK games, my rationale for selecting these titles, leveraging my love of Romance of the Three Kingdoms, simply wasn't panning out. After reading up on the grand strategy landscape, I made one last attempt to pick a winner, and just went for a well-regarded consensus choice: Crusader Kings 3. The base game is focused on Europe in the Middle Ages, from the days of the Vikings through the fall of the Byzantines. There's a ton of DLC, so much that it would be difficult to overestimate. Go ahead, try it. Try to guess the sum total price of all the Crusader Kings 3 DLC as of the date of this video. Did you guess more or less than 265 USD? Now, none of that was necessary to start the game as Murchad, petty king of the Irish Duchy of Munster. My Murchad lived and relived a few brief and disastrous lives as I was getting my bearings, but on my third attempt, Murchad was hungry for war and ready to go. The thing about Crusader Kings 3, unlike ROTK or Total War, is that it is, honestly, character driven and focused on emergent storytelling, a whirlwind driven by snap judgments and random catastrophes, a grand strategy game for the Judge Judy fans out there. As a widower who already had an heir, I was unconcerned about a second wife's social status and so married for talent, so that she could help me manage the duchy. But for my son, to shore up his legitimacy, I sought to betroth him to a well-connected daughter of nobility, selecting one of the daughters of William the Bastard simply because he had the largest army. It was a betrothal rather than a marriage because his daughter was only 10. Old European nobility is really weird, man. But having at least done something that could hypothetically at some point potentially lead to a grandson, I turned my attention south and declared war on the county of Desmond, easily claiming it and vassalizing its count before turning my attention east to Ossory and Leicester. Here I learned that European nobles can't just declare war on raw caprice. I was only able to do so with Desmond because Desmond was technically supposed to be part of Munster. Leicester wasn't, so I had to bribe my court priest in order to finesse something with the church to fabricate a plausible enough claim to leverage. It took time and money, neither of which I liked spending. By the time I was done with Leicester and wanted to absorb neighboring Ossory, my son and I had both contracted some kind of plague. I decided it would be easier to pursue peaceable means and just started sending gifts and love letters to various lesser lords around Ireland to butter them up and sweet talk them into accepting vassalization. It meant I'd have to give them more favorable terms, which meant less tax money. But it seemed easier. Dublin even reached out proactively and offered to be my ally, which I agreed to. Why not? Remove them as a threat without lifting a finger? Well, I was about to learn why not. My sickly son got better, and I got worse. His betrothed came of age, and they married but weren't producing an heir. Meanwhile, my second wife gave me a second son, and had another child on the way. This was a problem because Irish law meant that my accumulated duchies would be split among my heirs upon my death, fracturing my realm unless I managed to claim kingship over all Ireland, as kingship would pass to my firstborn. I had 7 of the 8 counties I would need to do that. Dublin could have been the 8th if I'd pressed for vassalization instead of accepting allyship. And then, out of nowhere, the King of Scotland sailed across the sea and declared war on Dublin while I was at death's door, and Dublin called for aid. I didn't want to lose face, or cause drama, or give Scotland an Irish beachhead, so I answered, and together our armies beat back the Scottish. All was well. I even miraculously recovered from the plague, and my wife had a third son. Time to press for kingship. Except the King of Scotland then returned with thousands more troops, and while formally still aiming for control of Dublin, he sacked my lands instead. Because Dublin was formerly the defender, and Dublin had no alliance with William the Bastard, we couldn't call on the English for help. Panicking, I fled the field and let Scotland claim Dublin and take its ruler prisoner. Sorry, dude. Predictably, the King of Scotland then declared war on me, but because I had betrothed my son to a 10-year-old English noble 15 years earlier, the English army answered my call, and we absolutely massacred the invading Scottish force. With the spoils and renown from that war, I was able to vassalize another Irish county and declare myself King of Ireland, allowing my dynasty to outlive me, at least for one more turn of the Wheel of Fate. The whole game waxes and wanes like this. It's not a game over when you die. You just control the next heir and the next heir for as long as you can, or until you reach the end of the game's timeline. It's stressful and exciting, at least for a neophyte, and I can see why the makers of Crusader Kings, Paradox, have a dedicated fan base. This game provides experiences that I've never seen before. There's even apparently a 3 Kingdoms mod for Crusader Kings, though I think my ROTK appetite may be better served by genres with more of a focus on individual heroism, and I think Petty Irish Kings is a fine enough setting for stories like these. Up next, character action games. I've liked many of the examples I've played over the years, from Devil May Cry 3 to Ninja Gaiden Black to Metal Gear Rising to God Hand. But I never gave Wonderful 101 a fair shake past a 15-minute snap judgment 15 years ago, and I've been increasingly curious about revisiting it ever since, given its zoomed out camera, Pikmin adjacent control concepts, and other idiosyncrasies, so I'm gonna give it my best.